Hi there, this is my review of the big new Making of House of the Dragon book. House of the Dragon Inside the Creation of a Targaryen Dynasty. Now, I meant to get this out last week, but I got sick again, as you can hear from my voice, that I was laid out with a bad cough all of January. I got better just in time for when this book came out. It came out January 31st. My copy came in the mail on Friday, last Friday. I read it, then over the weekend I went to a family gathering, got sick again. And rather than lose my voice again for weeks, I am pumped to the gills on antibiotics. I'm very nauseous, I can barely keep food down, but I need my speaking voice to run this channel, so I'm sorry for the delay on this. But what frightens me is there aren't news channels really reviewing this thing. I mean, bigger things like the mainstream news sites are not picking this apart for information, even though we didn't get Blu-ray materials this year. Because of the fall schedule, they just put out the content alone, and nothing else. Like, you see one or two quotes circulating, and you see this happen when they put out a single quote, like, they cast young Rhaenyra based on photos of what Emma Darcy looked like as a teenager. Like, that is one of the two factoids circulating, and one news site reports it, then the other ones are just copycatting the first one, and that isn't even a fact, a factoid. Like, I assume that when you cast the younger version of someone, you base it on photos of the adult actor when they were the same age. How is that information? So I'm not even seeing, like, if you read through this, there are other little bits and pieces that were interesting information that no one is reporting on because of the whole news sites have turned into celebrity hype, that if it wasn't this really cool piece of info about the core cast members like Rhaenyra or Alicent, fluff news they won't report. And even then, there were interesting things about Rhaenyra and Alicent in this, and I'm surprised they didn't report on it. I'll talk about that. But that's the news industry, that rather than make clickbait about a Jon Snow series, I was waiting for this book, and I wanted to data mine it and exhaust all information from it. Been on our calendar since season 1 ended, and as of when I'm making this, there is no subsequent Blu-ray release in sight that I thought, okay, this is the in time for Christmas version. Maybe by summer or next Christmas, we'll get a different full Blu-ray set that has commentary tracks in it. And so far, we haven't seen anything. That if that is coming, it's not in the next 2 to 3 months. We'd have heard of something in product registries. So I'm sorry I'm a little behind on this because I was sick and I got sick again, taking a lot of antibiotics. What's everyone else's excuse in the so-called reporters who just didn't think to go through it's a hit show. Why wouldn't you? There's a lot of information in this thing that they're just not covering. So the way I'm doing this is I'm actually splitting this up into a series of videos, a multi-part review. This is part 1, the overview / just general review of the quality of the book. I'm not talking about information in this. That I split that off, and there's going to be 4 parts. This is part 1. I'm going to do part 2 is going to be on design information, things that don't involve physical production, but just ideas of, this is the ideas we had for set design, costume design, dragon design, is part 2. Part 3 is details from the actual filming process, the logistical needs of making a show. And part 4 is just interesting odds and ends. That is how I'm approaching this, and even then, there's stuff in this book that will tie into larger videos on specific topics I already wanted to make. This is the short, I'm getting it out as quickly as possible version. So here I'm giving the overview review of this. This is not as good as prior behind-the-scenes Game of Thrones books. The one they did for seasons 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4. And then they stopped making them for the later seasons. But Other books like this that they made were more systematic and had better interviews, like had really detailed interviews with the costumer, Clapton, going region by region, going, this is what each region looks like, having really good concept art. And of course, they were lying to us about how bad the production process really was. But in terms of talking to the designers, like the costumers, the concept artists, that was really well put together. This was a bit more shallow and generalized. There were still nuggets of good information. That, if you think about it, they didn't know they didn't know this series was going to be a hit. So they didn't know they'd even make this book. It was announced October 12th. Well into season 1, like 2 weeks before the season finale. Now, behind the scenes, I'm not sure when they commissioned it, because that's when they announced it. There might be a difference. Other thing I didn't know is I was waiting for the hardcover release. There actually was a digital release in December. I just didn't know about it, which was released on December 13th. So think about it, that all of the interview information in this book was gathered by December 13th, and they only announced it October 12th, just 2 months before. I don't think they had time to do extensive interviews or really put it together. Then again, I think there were more extensive... I'll explain this. That it feels like they cut out information, because, like a costumer, if you call them, they'll give you a 10-minute conversation. They won't just give you a paragraph blurb. They'll explain all their work. It feels like they cut it down. The book feels rushed. There are certain errors in it. Little things now and again, like accidentally referring to Aegon as Rhaenyra's stepbrother instead of her half-brother on one page, then calling him half-brother on another page. Little things here and there that you can tell this was rushed out because they didn't know the show was going to be a hit. It's not terrible. It's not offensively. It's just, it was a bit of a rush job. It's not as just, even looking back to those season 1 and 2 books, I mean, I have them on my shelf. I picked them out and went, no, this is, compared to those are very systematic. They went through every aspect of the design team and the amount of information on the page. This is something that got put together pretty quickly. So in terms of quality, informational content that we want, it's worth about a dozen major news articles, like the type we see where they give interviews in Variety or THR or Entertainment Weekly. It's like a dozen of those worth of quality, and sometimes those articles are really good in terms of the information we get out of it. Let me give you more detail, explain what I'm talking about. The book is divided into 4 unequal chapters of different size. There's about 250 pages. Pages 1 through 22, first chapter, Origins, are entirely repeating information we already knew from news articles, that this book was intended for people who were not keeping up with the news. I'm making this video for you guys, but also with an eye towards other YouTubers, other YouTube channels that might not have gotten their hands on this, or other international fan groups from Brazil, from France. Just, if you didn't get your hands on the book, what was in it, information-wise, and if you have been keeping up with the news. I hate when the shallow, fluff, general news sites go, wow, did you know that there's like a detail that was in an Entertainment Weekly interview from the week of the premiere. You can, some of these things in the book are repeated from that, and it's good to have it collected all in one place for the general audience who weren't keeping up with it. So, is it bad to have 20 pages summarizing how the show came to be that we all know already, but there's people who don't even watch YouTube, they're just picking it up. Okay, it's a summary of that. And it's just 20 pages getting your footing, but there's no information in it that we didn't already know. Then Chapter 2, Redesigning Westeros, is pages 22 to 54. So about 30 pages on that, interviewing the set designers, the costumers, and the creature designers. There's surprisingly little information in that. There's some information in it from the set design team that I didn't already know. Otherwise, this was a real letdown for, like, dragon designs has no new information, or the costumes has no new information. And it's so shallow, you can tell the costumer must have told them more, and they cut it out. Because they wanted this to be more generalized. Even then, Chapter 2, okay, there was a few things I didn't know in this, but from the set design stuff. Chapter 3 is casting and costumes. I'm sorry, that was where the costumes came in, and there was nothing. It's not even about the costumes, it's about the casting process, pages 78 through 124. So yeah, good enough, 40 pages on just how we cast everyone, which is pure rehash of, and this is how we cast Emma Darcy, which I know from interviews. That there's the entire first half of the book, up till the mid-seam of the book, where the fold in the middle, there is really nothing. There's a sentence or two worth of information through page 125 out of 250. Good to have if you haven't been keeping up with the news articles, but if you have, this wasn't worth it. And even these felt padded out. I'll explain that. Chapter 4, the last chapter, the entire second half of the book is Chapter 4, Production. Which then, there's internal section. It's section, it's weird, there's 4 chapters, but then there's internal sections within them. Chapter 4, Production, then has 10 internal chapters, 1 on each episode. And that actually does contain new information. Again, like a good Entertainment Weekly article, if you're lucky, for a certain episode. Not always great. It's not the level of quality I would expect from a one of those really detailed behind-the-scenes Star Trek books or something for an episode guide. It's a random collection of interviews in which, luck of the draw, sometimes Sapochnik or Condell will say it'll be a really interesting quote from them which wasn't included in another interview, as they go through each of the 10 episodes. So it's really 125 pages. And even then, so much of the production stuff is still padding with the images are needlessly big that you can tell they're padding out the word count. There's maybe 100 pages of content in this. So I was disappointed, but I don't think it is very possible they only ordered this book in early October. At first I thought, okay, maybe they only told us about it in October, but no, I think they didn't even think to order this until season 1 was already well received after the first episode, so it feels slapped together. I'm still happy to have it, don't get me wrong, and it's useful for people who are a general audience who weren't following our news channels, but it was still quite a letdown. I talked about padding, let me explain that. It will needlessly pad the word count of text by re-summarizing the plot of an entire episode more than it needs to, or explaining who Rhaenyra is. And it's, for God's sake, I'm buying the book, I know who Rhaenyra is. I know what happened in the main narrative of that episode. And yes, you would re-summarize it a little more to give context or something. Example, if I were to have a section describing the filming of Episode 7, Driftmark, the scene where Aemond claims the dragon Vhagar, I quickly write, in this episode, Aemond claims Vhagar by sneaking onto the beach at night. 1 sentence. The beach scenes were filmed on location, but the riding scenes were actually on the digital set, and this is what happened during the filming process. That's 1 sentence of going, he claims her on the beach at night. It will needlessly spend 2 to 3 paragraphs summarizing the plot of the entire episode. And this is Aemond, brother of Aegon, who after the funeral sneaks out, even though this is Laena's dragon. You can tell, like a teacher reading a kid. I know when teachers say, when kids write us essays, and we can tell they're padding their word count by needlessly going on, repeating themselves. The text frequent, and it's that bizarre contrast of it felt like they were cutting out the really detailed quotes the designers gave, while at the same time padding out the text count in other sections. To needlessly re-summarizing, and I saw the episode, you don't need to do this. It's well beyond providing context. But a bigger problem, you could argue the text is, well, a thing, and relative to other behind-the-scenes Game of Thrones Seasons 1 and 2 books, or 3 and 4, I took them off my shelf to do a side-by-side comparison. It also pads the size of the book by having needlessly large images. Like, there are a lot of full-page photos, and double-page photo spreads even, which are not behind-the-scenes photos, but a high-resolution screenshot, or, like the promo images they put out. They'll needlessly have a full-page image of. This isn't conveying information. It was already available online. I can zoom in. It's better resolution of just the promo shots. Sometimes they'll have full-page stuff of the costumes, but not like the wedding costume. Like, you could go... They don't... The weird thing is, they don't have a full-page image of Rhaenyra's wedding dress, but they needlessly have a full-page image of Luke Valarian's riding costume. It's not even like, well, you could argue, well, this is good. Daemon's armor is a really good costume. Actually, I think that was a full page, but it made sense to do that. There's these double-page image spreads and full-page images, and not just that they're there, but there's quite a few of them. That going through this, you can tell you are padding this out. The run of this. And I'm going just how little information is on the page. And I'm doing this audio only just to get it done quickly. Whereas the other books would have 3/4 of the page was text, and 1/4 of the page was an image illustrating this is what we're talking about, or a behind-the-scenes detail. In this, 3/4 of the page would be images, and 1/4 would be text. And then of that 1/4 text, which is like 2 or 3 paragraphs, like 2 paragraphs, or all of them, might be needlessly summarizing an episode I already watched, more than just giving context. So you can tell they didn't have time to do the extensive deep dive they wanted to. But even then, I felt like they couldn't tell if they wanted this book to be a really exhaustive behind-the-scenes thing or something for a general audience that would sell well. They're thinking, well, the general audience wants not a behind-the-scenes definitive guide, but a coffee table book. That's the phrase they use. A coffee table book is an art book, is a photography book. That this isn't presented as a behind-the-scenes deep dive, but as a photography book that has some information in it. And I'm not sure who did that I feel like it was a directive handed down by HBO. Because again, like, the costumer assuredly told you more than 3 paragraphs worth of description of their own work. The directors must have told you more than this, that you chose not to put in and instead put in another full-page image or something. So I feel like halfway through that not only was it slapped together, even if this was slapped together, they must have told you more, or you could have pulled things from other interviews. I felt like they watered it down to be a coffee table book. And not in a bad way. If you never picked up any news article, if you never followed any YouTube channels, it's a pretty decent book. Don't get me wrong. I mean, in all seriousness, it's not offensively bad. They owe us, for Season 2 of this, that I'm willing to give you that you didn't know that this would be a hit in Season 1, and that this had to be put together quickly, but now there is an appetite and an audience for a really deep dive on what went on behind the scenes. Worst of all for me is the concept art. The concept art was very disappointing because someone behind the scenes, somewhere made the decision that they only present the final versions of concept art in this. For costumes, for the dragons themselves, where it's not that much different from an actual photograph, a still image from the episode. In which case, what's the point? The entire concept behind this, the entire idea behind a behind-the-scenes book with concept art, is seeing the transitional stages across multiple stages as the development process went over time. This just shows, like, the Vhagar, the dragon section, for example, has 2 full-page spreads on Vhagar with some text, both of which are the concept art that reflects the final version. It basically looks like what you saw on screen. This is worthless to me. That the entire... It would have worth if this was the last in a series of 3 or 4 pieces of concept art on a single page, to show this is where we started and this is where it ended. I'm not knocking the work that the concept artist put into the art, because it turned into what we saw on screen. I'm saying it is worthless in the capacity of this book, that this isn't conveying anything to me. And what really shames this, in the past week, one of the 2 dragon concept artists put out early concept art of Vhagar that isn't in the book over his Instagram. It's something basic, like, and they went through many stages of how do we show what a dragon looks like when it gets really old. That it never stops growing, so it looks overgrown almost. It has health problems from it's grown too big. They did say in the text part of this that an idea we came up with mid-run is when a dragon gets really old, its scales get so overgrown that their horns snap off. Then the final version, Vhagar doesn't have horns, but they say she lost her horns. She looked like Drogon or Sea Smoke when she was younger, but she's so old that her horns have snapped off from their scales pushed them out or something. The concept art you see in the book only shows her hornless, and it looks exactly like what you saw on screen. The concept artist in the past week over Instagram put out earlier Vhagar concept art, earlier in the design process, back when she still had horns. Rather than make a 2-page spread of the final concept art, they should have had, like, half a page to a quarter of the page on this is when she had horns, and next to it, this is the final version when we decided her horns have snapped off with old age. They didn't do that. That is the entire point behind concept art. There were some preview shots of this that were around a month ago or something. The public preview shots are like the page about Caraxes. That's pretty much what the whole thing is. That if you've seen those preview images of this is the Caraxes page, it looks like what the TV version, the final version we see on TV. The concept art doesn't look different from what we saw on TV, where they even say in text it took us a long time to figure out that Caraxes looks different from other dragons, that he's kind of this mutation or atavism, that he's this fluke of genetics that somehow he came out weird. And it took them a while, and they said it took us a while to narrow that down. And the concept art, that like what you see in that preview is what you get. They don't show us interesting early concepts that are gradually evolving into the final version of Caraxes. They just showed us the final version. For that matter, the text parts barely give any new info from the dragon concept artists that we didn't already see in other interviews. In terms of the design, they repeat that Vhagar is so old, she's become overgrown. This is stuff Condell prominently said in interviews around Premiere Week and Entertainment Weekly. It says nothing about that there's different dragon breeds. And we kind of came up with there's 3 kinds of dragon. There's the T-Rex shaped head ones, the wolf ones, and the horse ones. There is nothing new in this. And there isn't even new concept art. There is new concept art, but it's all of the final stage, in which case you might as well have used a photo. This has the value is seeing the transitional stages. And again, going back to the example of costumes, like Clapton in the Making of Game of Thrones season 1 and 2 book had concept art of Daenerys or the Dothraki or Arya, which you can see the stages it went through before she reached the final version. And it presents it that way. This doesn't. It is a massive disappointment. So the images in this book have no value to me in their capacity as conveying information we didn't already know. There's one or two close-ups on like dragon saddles and stuff, which, okay, we could never have seen. Even I think they released that over the internet. The behind-the-scenes promo stills of props and things. Or like there's a really good full-page blow-up of a Triarchy archer uniform, which I don't think was online before, but in terms of this is a behind-the-scenes detail you could never have seen, it doesn't. There is a really nice 4-page section on Blackfire and Dark Sister, which is incredibly detailed, which I don't think they might not have mentioned before. That was interesting. But there is no significantly new concept art, and there'll be like concept art of Rhaenyra's sons. It looks like someone... You see this all the time online where people draw fan art of what they saw on TV. You would mistake this for fan art based on the TV show, not the other way around, because they only present the final version. Where it's the whole point is I want to see how what was on page went to screen. And I'm chalking all this up to this was slapped together and rushed out. I also worry that they cut out interviews because, well, no, this is a coffee table book. There was don't get me wrong, and I want to emphasize, I'm annoyed about this. They owe us for season 2, but I didn't feel cheated. I want to stress that. There were enough new nuggets of information in this. Some of these were things I wanted to know for a long time that they did answer. That it was worth the price of this. I got it as a late Christmas present. I got an IOU for Christmas because it was on my list of I want this, but it's coming out in January. But it wasn't really systemic as an attempt to go, this is costuming, this is set to... Well, there were chapters on that, but it was shallow for each of them. I know costumes could support its own book, art styles could support its own book. It was going for breadth over depth, that it went wide instead of deep, trying to cover every part of the show. And just randomly, like in the middle of a chapter about episode 3, Sapochnik will say, this is a thing we've been trying to do for the whole show as a design aesthetic, which is really good information, but just pops up randomly. So it's like a random collection of 12 articles from Entertainment Weekly and THR, which, luck of the draw, sometimes have really good information in them. But it's not well presented. And I'm not holding that against the actual book author, Gina McIntyre, because, again, this was rushed out at the last minute. I think it was ordered at the last minute, and for all I know, the order to leave out detail, make it a coffee table book, may have been an order handed down from her superiors. No, in all fairness, how do we know that was her decision? Maybe that this was micromanagement from someone higher on the totem pole. So am I asking for, she should never write one? Give her another shot. These were bad circumstances. They had to rush it out. I'm okay with that. Just this was a bit of a rush job. And the irony, of course, is I go, there wasn't that much info in this. And now I'm going to make an hour-long set of videos going over the top 10 points of this. Just they weren't that big compared to when Game of Thrones would go, this is the design difference between Marjorie and Cersei. And it was mind-blowing. This didn't give quite as much information. The dragon stuff was a huge letdown. Obviously, I skipped, when I got the book, I first skipped to the section on dragons. And it had concept art that just looked like what you saw on screen, which was blown up to a full page to eat up space, and which was repeating information Condell and the designers had already given in other public interviews in Entertainment Weekly and THR. That the dragon section has nothing new. This is deeply upsetting. And that contrast that the same week one of the designers said, well, this is what an early Vagar concept art looks like. Why isn't this in the book? So that was upsetting. Let me see, I'm going down my set of lists here, like, and it's little things like, fans love the details so much, it's stuff we can't normally see, that we'd like a page showing off all the new heraldry designs they came up with for Season 1. I think they actually did that in the sense that there's a page showing off all the tournament props. And because the Hightowers and Velaryons are in the tourney, it prominently shows this is the new Hightower sigil, this is the new Velaryon sigil, because they're at the tournament. But they're not every new one. That, like, in the Stepstones battles, you can tell there's new heraldry they came up with for the narrow sea houses that's never been on camera before. They don't present. There's this one full-page shot of the Stepstones battle where you can tell, oh, that's the new sigil for Bar Emin, the leaping swordfish. And just because someone randomly happens to be holding their shield in a prominent position that you can see the heraldry on it. And this is by pure accident. It's just, why didn't you have a page showing off all the new heraldry? Because, that's a geeky detail people love. What they thought people would love from this is full-page images of the cast members in costumes we've already seen. It's just, books can't compete with the goddamned internet. People don't go, I'm going to buy a really expensive book with high-resolution, full-page images of Emma Darcy in costume as Rhaenyra, when these are literally reused promo images that are already online for free. Why would I buy a book of that? They're not exclusive. And you want exclusive, maybe if they were alternate scenes, alternate shots. And sometimes we get them. I'm not knocking the whole thing. There are storyboards in this. Just not enough. There's a few times where they show storyboards, and it is interesting, but this book tried to be a generalist. It tried to be everything, and it dabbled in a little bit of storyboards, a little bit of concept art, a little bit of interviews, ultimately not really satisfying anyone. And again, it feels like less than 100 pages of content padded out to 250 pages with really big images that are needlessly big when they're not even detailed, or needlessly padding the word count. So they owe us for Season 2. I'd even give Gina McIntyre another shot at this, because I know there are extenuating circumstances behind this, but we have a 1.5 year wait for Season 2. Make a better thing for next Christmas, please. That it wasn't all bad. It's just, this is not what I was expecting under the Christmas tree of all this dragon behind-the-scenes stuff. One thing is, because, like, the concept artist is on Instagram posting stuff, I'm hoping to flag him down and ask him, hey, can I ask you more about the dragon designs, because the book revealed nothing. And I don't know if I'm going to succeed in that, but I'm going to try to contact the dragon concept artists. The costumer, Gina Tamim, is also on Instagram, interacts with fans. I will try to ask them independently of this book. But in terms of design stuff, like, there's podcasts they've done, like with Jason Conception's podcast, did a really good one with Jim Clay I didn't finish. But in terms of this book, it was quite a letdown. So I'm making this video series, so you don't need to get the book. I'm sharing with you all the good parts that were actual information for free. And if they don't want fans to do that, maybe they should make a book filled with so much information I can't easily summarize it in a series of videos. The fact that I can summarize this in a string of videos, 3 more videos I'm going to make, shows there wasn't that much in it. But then again, this, think about it, this was considered a dead franchise as late as last August. Sorry I'm feeling down about this, and again, I'm sick, so I'm just blue about all. This was quite a letdown. So, like I said, stick around for part 2 of this, where I broke down the information that's actually in it into categories. That part 2 is going to be dragon designs. They actually did mention something new, which I thought was interesting, and I'll explain what that is. New info on dragon designs, info on set stuff, costume stuff, and architecture style. So part 2 is design things that have nothing to do with the production process. Part 3, which is actually a lot longer and has, let's see here, 7 points in it, is the production side of things, and that has a lot more heavy comparisons to they did right, things that Benioff and Weiss did wrong, because as they flippantly joked, this was the world's most expensive film school. And we gradually realized the depth of they really meant that. They had no idea what they were doing. It was chaos behind the scenes. Versus the competence of this filming crew. And you can tell Sapochnik in some of his quotes, this time we're doing it the right way. He never says the right way, but how they set up filming, how they plan things out. That this time Sapochnik wasn't being micromanaged by 2 novelists with no prior filming experience, but was running it like a normal TV show. And just explaining how this is what normal TV is like. And I can see why, at first glance, if you're just flipping through this, skimming it for exciting quotes about young Rhaenyra was cast based on photos of Emma Darcy when they were younger. That isn't news. I assume they did that. But that's easier to pick up on versus when Sapochnik is explaining, this is how I filmed this scene. I'm mentally comparing that to prior interviews he's given where he complained about Benioff and Weiss. I was fighting with them that they didn't know how to work with horses. They didn't know that you're supposed to set up and plan out every camera angle before you start filming. Otherwise, you waste time. That he explained, just going through, this is how a normal TV show functions. That you've been following my channel, it's actually really interesting. This is how we did it differently this time. This is normal. Information on some of the characters. And then the 4th part is just a few bonus things I couldn't fit in anywhere else. So I was expecting more from this, and I'm willing to give them that there was a pandemic, and they didn't know if this would be a hit. Next time they need to do a lot better than this. And this is not an end, this is a beginning. Because like I said, I have been so sick intermittently since first week of December. Just on and off, I haven't barely gotten anything done. I have a massive backlog of all of their interviews materials from the run of Season 1. I talked about this in the schedule video I made at the end of January, where I said I have to watch line by line to the point of exhaustion all the info in that wonderful Inside the House the Dragons Built series. There's a ton of info in that. I heard recently, someone was confused by this. It didn't come out in Europe for some reason because they had a subtitle thing and we didn't know if we should translate it or not. They didn't know if the show would be popular. That I think that there was some mention they're actually going to release it in Spain and Portugal in a month or so, which was a big problem, that they haven't released the big behind-the-scenes series even in the countries they filmed in. And it is available in Brazil and Latin America and the rest of Latin America. Someone was confused by this. I think they're actually going to start releasing it in the rest of Europe during the summer, which is good. It's an amazing series. You need to watch it. But in terms of new stuff, I need to go back and watch that. There's all of these podcasts that the designers did. I had to finish that Jim Clay podcast. There are podcast interviews the directors have given that I haven't finished yet. And the thing I'm doing dead last is cast interviews, because they're usually, puff piece interviews meant to promote the show, not to explain it. Like when they send Olivia Cook to a late night talk show, it's her going, this is what House of the Dragon is, rather than a detailed hour-long podcast where a director's explaining this is how we filmed an episode. So I'm starting with the creative staff and only at the end getting to the cast, and there's still a ton of work I need to do. So now that my voice is recovered to the point, I was never really a voice actor who could present this in an entertaining way by saying names in a funny voice. I could present this in a scratchy monotone. It wouldn't matter because I'm conveying information to you. I'm a researcher, not an actor trying to, just entertain you with saying, like fake Jon Snow sequel leaks in a funny voice. That this matters. This is research. So I'm upset at major news websites who were not really devoting attention, even after season 1 was a hit, just aren't really paying attention when big new interviews come out. They'll just latch on to, here's a funny detail about Millie Alcock. And I love Millie Alcock. I love Emmett Darcy and all the Emily Carey and all the rest of the cast. You aren't journalists. You turned into celebrity hype reporters, and there's a lot of behind-the-scenes info that they haven't gotten to. So I guess this isn't an end, it is a beginning. That after 3 months of being so sick I could barely talk or work, this got the ball rolling for me. And it did feel productive. After I finished making my info dump videos about what I gained from this book, I'm moving right on to the news catch-up project, where I'm going over every podcast every director gave, every podcast the design team made. There's not that many. Like, I managed to write out a full list of them, and I'm just crossing things off. The cast ones are longer, but I'm doing those last because there's a lot of them with little return on investment. They don't talk about design things as much, versus, like, there's, 2 or 3 podcast interviews with Jim Clay, the production designer, which I could get a ton of information out of, because they're focused on actual design things. Or the director ones. I've already lined up a lot of podcasts I've seen with Claire Kilner and Greg Gaetanis have done a lot of podcasts, which I want to go through. So this is the news catch-up on Season 1, which I should have hit the ground running with back in November, December. I've just been so sick. This has been a terrible cold season for everyone. I've seen everyone getting sick lately. Preston Jacobs, Glidus, it hit us really hard, and we rely on our voices. But we have a long wait ahead of us, so this is getting back into the swing of things. I don't know if I hope that even if we don't get commentary tracks, maybe they'll release new Histories and Lore motion comics by the summer or something as an HBO Max exclusive. Because I know, like, they're gutting their animation industry, but the motion comics are cheap to make. I assume they could do that. It's only an hour long. I don't know if they're going to do that or not. I used to assume, they'll do it later, maybe next Christmas. I don't even think they do that by summer. So there is no new behind-the-scenes material on the horizon. If you live in Europe, you might be getting access to the really good behind-the-scenes. For all the complaints that this book wasn't very good, they did an amazing job on that behind-the-scenes series. House of Dragons Built is about 4 hours long. It's like 11 episodes, including the bonus one they put out with the DVD. It's 11 episodes, about 23 minutes each. They are filled with information. It is really good. I have to review. I watched them, during the grind, week to week, rushed out as it was airing. I need to go back and do those line by line, squeeze every piece of information out. And gradually, I'm going to report it on YouTube. I'm going to make tons of wiki notes from them, because that's where I leave public notes so other people can share them. So this is the beginning of that process. As a book, should you get this, if you're watching my channel, you've probably already seen most of the information in it. I'm not offended it exists, because it's for a general audience, but relative to other behind-the-scenes books they've made, like, the images are too big. They don't show a progression of concept art from early to late stages, showing these are where we changed our minds on things. Randomly, the people in it happen to mention interesting things, not because the book was interviewing them, but just, here's, in this episode, Sapochnik felt like saying, an early idea we had was this, but then this happened. And they don't think to ask that for every episode. So here we go, back into more 2 hours of more of videos where I talk about the details we did get in extensive detail. As I lament, it's still not enough. Sorry, I'm just recovering from the bad cold I have, but leaving this as audio only, I expected more from this in terms of the concept art, the production. It's like 10 good articles, but 10 good articles are 10 good articles. So follow me through. This is just the introduction into the videos where I actually cover accepting as a given that this wasn't a very informative book, here are points of information they actually did give, which I'm happy to get. And there's one or two things that, like the fact that randomly, not because of the book, but just there's a point where Sapochnik explains this is officially how the cinematography looks different in House of the Dragon. That alone made the book worth the price of purchase. I'm completely serious. That was a major question I had. So, luck of the draw, they accidentally happened to answer some really big questions I had in terms of design things. But if you're looking for dragon stuff or costume stuff, you'd be very disappointed. So, follow me after the jump into the topical videos on this as I break it down point by point.